Ethan Harper had always thought his life at home was ordinary, almost mundane. Living with his father, Liam, and his stepmother, Olivia, the house usually carried the quiet rhythm of daily routines, meals shared, conversations about bills or work, the occasional tension that passed as quickly as it came. But over the past few months, something in the air had shifted, subtle yet impossible to ignore. Olivia moved through the house with a kind of controlled elegance that made Ethan's chest tighten in ways he didn't fully understand. She laughed softly at things he barely noticed, and her eyes sometimes lingered just a fraction too long when she caught him watching. That it wasn't that he didn't like his stepmother, he genuinely respected her. But there was something almost magnetic about the way she carried herself, a sense of mystery that left him feeling both guilty and curious. He reminded himself constantly that crossing lines was not an option, that Liam trusted Olivia and he had no right to entertain these thoughts. Yet, curiosity, as it often does, had a way of whispering louder than logic. That afternoon, the house was unusually quiet. Liam had gone to the office early, leaving Ethan alone with the house that suddenly felt too large, too empty. The sunlight slanted through the windows, casting shadows on the walls that seemed to stretch longer than they should. Ethan wandered aimlessly, his fingers brushing over shelves, glancing at photographs of the family. Olivia had left for a brief errand, but she had forgotten her small set of keys on the counter. Something about seeing them there pulled him toward them, as though an invisible thread had tied him to that moment that he hesitated by the doorway of the bathroom. Normally, there was nothing remarkable about a bathroom: mirrors, faucets, neatly stacked towels, but that day it felt different. Perhaps it was the lingering scent of Olivia's perfume, floral and faintly sharp, or the memory of her humming as she had tidied it the night before. Whatever it was, Ethan felt a pull he couldn't quite explain. Just as he reached for the doorknob, he stopped. "This is absurd," he told himself. "You're just being curious, nothing more." Yet, even as he thought it, his fingers closed around the cold metal, and the door clicked softly as it opened. Inside, the bathroom was as he remembered, bright, tidy, a sense of personal order that contrasted sharply with the chaos of his own mind. He stepped in quietly, careful not to make a sound, glancing at the countertop where Olivia's perfumes and lotions were arranged with precise care. Ethan's eyes lingered on a small, ornate bottle. He picked it up, turning it in his hands, marveling at the way the light caught the glass. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear the soft footsteps behind him until it was almost too late. "Ethan." The voice was low, controlled, and it made his stomach drop. He spun around, and there she was, Olivia, framed in the doorway, her eyes narrowing, a mixture of disbelief and something else he couldn't name. His mind froze. Words that he had rehearsed for moments like this vanished completely. I just wanted to, his voice faltered. There was no hiding the panic, no excuse that sounded plausible in the sudden weight of her gaze. Olivia stepped into the room, the soft click of her heels against the tile echoing in his ears. "You shouldn't be here," she said simply, but there was an undercurrent in her tone that made him even more uncertain of what she was thinking. "Do you have any idea how dangerous it is to cross boundaries like this?" Ethan swallowed hard. I know, I didn't mean to." He stopped himself, realizing that the word sounded feeble, almost childish. For a moment, Olivia said nothing. She studied him, and Ethan felt the pressure of her eyes like a weight pressing down on his chest. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke again, softer this time. "Curiosity can be dangerous, Ethan. It can lead to choices you'll regret before you even understand them." He nodded quickly, too aware of his own guilt to say anything more. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, a charged silence broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of leaves outside the window. Ethan wanted to retreat, to leave and pretend none of this had happened, but part of him was rooted to the spot, torn between fear and fascination. Olivia moved closer, but not threateningly. Her presence was overwhelming, almost magnetic, and Ethan felt the edges of his certainty blur. She reached for the bottle in his hands, taking it gently but firmly. "This doesn't belong to you," she said, placing it back on the counter. Her fingers brushed his briefly, a touch that was fleeting yet unforgettable. Ethan's heart raced, and he forced himself to look away. I should go, he murmured, stepping toward the door. Yes, Olivia replied, her voice calm but firm. Go. And remember what you've seen. Remember it clearly. Actions have consequences, Ethan. Some you can't take back. As he opened the door and stepped out, the cool air of the hallway felt almost like relief, but relief mingled with confusion. Olivia watched him go, her expression unreadable. Ethan didn't dare look back, even as a strange sense of anticipation settled in his chest. Something had shifted, something unspoken had changed the balance of their household, and he knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same. He moved down the hall slowly, each step echoing in the empty house, replaying every detail of that moment over and over in his mind. And somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the guilt, there was a spark of curiosity that refused to be extinguished, a quiet whisper that promised that this was far from over. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper reminders of Olivia's presence, and even the faint scent of her perfume that lingered in the air made his chest tighten. He tried to focus on something else, his studies, his phone, anything, but every time he closed his eyes, her voice echoed in his mind. Actions have consequences, Ethan. Some you can't take back. By evening, Liam returned home from work, cheerful and unaware of the storm brewing quietly in his own house. He greeted Ethan warmly, commenting on his day, while Olivia appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of drinks, her expression composed, almost unreadable. Ethan's stomach knotted. How could she act as if nothing had happened? Was she hiding anger, amusement, or something else entirely? Ethan tried to act normal, but the tension made his movements clumsy. Every glance Olivia gave him felt like a test, every pause in conversation a trap. He wanted to speak, to apologize or explain, but the words lodged in his throat. So he remained silent, watching her from the corner of his eye, aware of the delicate balance between curiosity and fear. Later that night, Ethan found himself alone in his room, replaying the encounter over and over. He tried to rationalize his actions. After all, he hadn't actually done anything wrong, but the guilt lingered like a shadow. His mind flicked to Olivia's words and her calm yet firm presence in the bathroom. He couldn't deny that something had shifted between them, something unspoken, something charged with tension he couldn't quite name. He hadn't noticed the soft knock on his door until he turned toward the sound. Ethan? It was Olivia. His heart jumped, and he froze. Yes, he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. She entered without waiting for an invitation, her steps quiet, measured. She didn't speak immediately, she simply leaned against the doorframe, her eyes studying him as if trying to read every thought he had. "We need to talk," she said finally, her tone calm but serious. Ethan nodded, though his throat felt tight. "Okay." She took a small step closer, keeping her distance, yet the intensity in her gaze made him feel cornered. "What you did today, walking into my bathroom, touching things that aren't yours, it's not just about curiosity. It's about respect, boundaries, and understanding where lines are drawn." "I know," Ethan murmured, looking down at his hands. I didn't mean to. I don't know what came over me. I wasn't thinking." Olivia sighed softly, her expression softening ever so slightly. "Curiosity is natural, Ethan. But it becomes dangerous when it ignores morality, trust, and the people around us. You need to understand that." He nodded again, but the tension didn't leave him. There was something in her voice, something almost playful beneath the seriousness, that made him second-guess everything he thought he knew about her. For the next few minutes, neither of them spoke. Ethan could feel his heart pounding, and the silence seemed to stretch endlessly. Then Olivia finally spoke, her tone shifting slightly. "I want to be honest with you, Ethan. I've made mistakes in the past, choices I regret, actions I wouldn't repeat if I could. I see a lot of myself in you, the curiosity, the uncertainty, the desire to push boundaries. But you have to learn from it without crossing lines that can't be uncrossed." Her words struck him harder than he expected. Ethan realized that this wasn't just a reprimand, it was a lesson, a confession, a warning. She wasn't threatening him in the way he feared, but she was making him confront his own impulses in a way that left him raw and unsettled. "I understand," he said quietly. "I won't do it again." Olivia nodded, and for a moment, the tension in her face eased. "Good. Remember, Ethan, there are consequences to everything. Sometimes they're obvious, sometimes they sneak up on you when you least expect them. Life has a way of teaching lessons we aren't ready for." After she left, Ethan sat on his bed, staring at the wall. Her words replayed in his mind, mingling with his own swirling emotions. Curiosity, guilt, fascination, fear, all of it blended into a confusing tangle that made it impossible to focus on anything else. He realized that he was standing at a crossroads, and the choices he made now could define the rest of his time in this house. Over the next few days, the household returned to its routine, but nothing felt normal to Ethan. Olivia moved through the house with the same grace, the same calm composure, but now there was a tension beneath the surface, an invisible thread that linked them in a silent, unspoken understanding. Ethan found himself watching her from a distance, trying to interpret her words, her actions, her glances. Each encounter left him more unsettled than the last, and he couldn't tell whether she was testing him or protecting him, or both. One evening, Sophie Clark, Ethan's close friend, stopped by. She noticed the shift in his demeanor immediately. "You've been different lately," she said, concern in her voice. "Something happened at home, didn't it?" Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. "It's nothing, really. Just stressful days, I guess." Sophie narrowed her eyes, unconvinced. "You know you can talk to me, right? I've known you too long to let you hide things. You're acting off. And it's not just stress." He forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "I'm fine. Really." She didn't press further, but the seed of doubt was planted. Ethan knew she would notice if he slipped, if he acted differently, if the tension in the house became too much. And part of him dreaded the day when someone would see the cracks in his carefully maintained facade. That night, Ethan lay awake, thinking about the bathroom, about Olivia, about everything that had happened. The house was quiet, but his mind was anything but. He realized that curiosity had a price, and he wasn't sure he was prepared to pay it. And yet, beneath the fear and guilt, a small, stubborn part of him whispered that this was only the beginning, that whatever had been set in motion that afternoon would continue to ripple through their lives in ways he couldn't yet predict. The next day, Ethan found himself walking past the bathroom again, hesitating as he glanced at the door. The memory of Olivia catching him, of her voice, her presence, still lingered in his mind like a shadow. He wanted to forget, to move on, but he knew that was impossible. Something between them had shifted irrevocably, and he would have to navigate the consequences, carefully, cautiously, for however long he remained in that house. And in the back of his mind, a quiet thought nagged at him, one that he tried to push away: this was far from over.
The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of quiet companionship. Adrian and I grew inseparable, our doors swinging open as though hinges no longer mattered. Meals were shared, study notes exchanged, and the silence of midnight hours filled with conversations that left us more entangled than either of us dared to admit. The hostel had hundreds of boys, yet it often felt like Adrian and I lived in a world apart, divided from the rest by invisible walls, but beneath the comfort of routine, unease grew. I caught myself watching him too long, memorizing the curve of his smile or the sound of his laughter. Each glance carried a weight I could no longer deny. And though I told myself to step back, to reclaim the distance we had so easily discarded, I found it impossible. Adrian had become a gravitational pull, and I was helplessly caught in his orbit. The conflict within me sharpened whenever Michael's name appeared. Adrian would occasionally mention him, never with enthusiasm, never with the warmth I expected from someone speaking of love. Once, when his phone rang during dinner, I noticed the name glowing on his screen. He silenced it, muttering something about bad timing, and continued eating as though nothing had happened. I said nothing, but my chest tightened with a mix of curiosity and guilt. Why was he ignoring the man he claimed to love? One evening, we lingered in my room long after most lights in the hostel had gone dark. Our books lay forgotten on the desk, and we sat cross-legged on the floor, speaking in low tones. Adrian confessed that he often felt misunderstood, that Michael expected things from him he could not always give. His words were steady, but his eyes betrayed a vulnerability he rarely allowed others to see. I wanted to comfort him, to say something meaningful, but all I managed was silence. In that silence, I realized my role was shifting. I was no longer just his friend. I was becoming his confidant, the one who knew the cracks in his carefully constructed armor. Guilt gnawed at me. I should have set boundaries, should have reminded him of the man waiting for him elsewhere. Yet the truth was crueler. I didn't want to. I wanted to be the one he turned to, the one who filled the void Michael seemed unable to reach. Each word he spoke deepened my longing and eroded my resolve. The night of confession came quietly, almost tenderly. We had been arguing over something trivial, whether he should reconcile with Michael or demand more honesty from him. I had spoken with unusual sharpness, frustration boiling over, not at Michael but at the invisible tether that bound Adrian away from me. He fell silent, staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. And then, without warning, he leaned forward and pressed his lips against mine. The kiss was brief but electric, shattering the fragile wall I had clung to for weeks. When he pulled away, the air between us seemed charged, the silence deafening. My heart pounded as I searched his face for regret, but all I saw was confusion, confusion that mirrored my own. We sat there, eyes locked, caught between desire and dread. Neither of us spoke of it the next day. Yet the current between us had shifted irreversibly. Every word, every gesture carried the echo of that moment. And though we tried to pretend otherwise, the truth hovered like a storm cloud. We had crossed a line. That night, Adrian returned to my room. There were no excuses this time, no pretense of study or conversation. He closed the door softly behind him, and in the quiet that followed, we gave in to what we had both been resisting. The weight of secrecy pressed down on me even as I felt the exhilaration of closeness I had long imagined. It was everything I had wanted, and everything I feared. When dawn broke, the world outside continued as though nothing had changed. Boys shouted in the corridor, breakfast smells drifted from the mess hall, and life resumed its predictable rhythm. But for me, nothing was the same. I lay awake long after Adrian slipped back into his own room, replaying every detail, every breath. The thrill was intoxicating, but beneath it lurked a shadow I could not ignore, that we had betrayed someone who trusted him, someone who deserved honesty. I had stepped willingly into the role of the intruder, the secret. The thought should have filled me with shame, but instead, it left me torn, between guilt and the dangerous sweetness of having what I had silently desired. And as I stared at the ceiling, I knew with painful clarity, the path ahead would not be simple. What had begun with a knock on the door had become something